Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 43 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Monday, October 31st, the committee will resume its study of women and girls in sport. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format, pursuant to the Standing Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize your name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use your earpiece and select the desired channel on your piece right here. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as we best can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. In accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Before we welcome our witnesses, I would like to provide this trigger warning. This will be a difficult study. We will be discussing experiences related to abuse. This may be triggering to our viewers, our members, our staff, who also have had similar experiences. If you feel distressed or you need help, please advise the clerk. I would now like to welcome our first guests, and with that, I'll also let people know there has been a bit of a change on our agenda. We'll have two panels today, so our first panel, and then we'll have a second panel starting in an hour from now. So on our first panel today, we have Miriam De Silva Rudeau and Kara McCormick. What we'll be doing is we'll be providing you some flexibility there. So you'll have 5 minutes for your opening statements, but just kind of watch me. And once I start dancing up here, just know that the time is coming to an end. So I'm going to pass the floor over immediately right now, and we'll pass it to Miriam. Miriam, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Standing Committee on the Status of Women for making room for us today. I was until recently an Olympic boxing athlete. I'm a 2019 Pan American Games silver medalist and hold 6 continental championships. I've maintained a top 10 world ranking throughout my years on the national team and competed in the Tokyo Olympics, finishing 9th overall. My arrival on the national team was in 2011. Despite a podium finish on my debut, I was greeted with the phrase, "At your age, one can't think about development. You're already old." In June 2019, I received a call from the High Performance Director telling me that I qualified for a card based on my results. However, I had to permanently leave my coach of the past 10 years and my team. I also had to leave my job quickly, and I had to give an answer within 48 hours, or the card would be offered to someone else. I negotiated a centralization that would begin at the end of the school year, as I am a teacher. He told me that I was not going to receive the full amount by doing this. I knew that wasn't true, but I still felt pressure and a sense of wrongdoing already. I wanted to report the event because this type of action is very frequent in sports federations. Unfortunately, it is not admissible and still won't be in the new OSIX system. As soon as I joined the centralization, it was made clear that I had to work with the team psychologist first, a person who I didn't trust based on previous experience and his great camaraderie with the administrative staff. We had to undergo personality tests every year. I approached the various resources in place that serve to protect athletes, expressing my concern. I was told, it's not admissible. At the World Championships in 2019, I witnessed staff members handing out prescription sleeping pills to athletes. The coach, who had a trusting relationship with all the athletes, was replaced by the high performance director without notice or explanation. The team massage therapist had to limit her contact with us. Upon return, the entire team turned to the resources in place. Again, we were told it was not admissible. The integrated support team provided coaching and support in communication and interpersonal skills to the administrative staff. In other words, it's not their fault. We'll help them at the expense of the athletes. This is how the system works, because none of the OZIX people have the authority to apply sanctions or warnings. A few weeks later, the trusted coach was fired without explanation, without notice. You can imagine what happened next when we addressed the different authorities that are supposed to protect us. We could not be heard. When athletes mention that there are no systems in place to protect them, it's not the number of resources or programs that are being talked about. There are quite a few of those. It is the action of holding people accountable and the power to enforce consequences. That's what's inexistent in the Canadian sports system. After 2 years of full-time centralization, the burnout set in, and I was no longer able to protect myself. I was forced to fight the so-called test fights with a partner much heavier and taller than me, and this on multiple occasions. I communicated. I verbalized, but nothing was done. I suffered a long period of dissociation from April 2021 to September 2021. I have no memories of the Olympics in Tokyo, which should have been one of my most memorable experiences. The only memory that I have left is this one, a video posted on social media by the new coach after my performance. In that video, after my fight, he mentioned that I had not lived up to his expectations, that it made him uncomfortable, and that I had not seized the opportunity to collect the medal that my country has been missing for 30 years. And that was extremely embarrassing for him and for Canada. Even though I complained to the different authorities, the coach in that video was able to continue working without even apologizing to me. I was isolated from the rest of the group at practice, and I was harassed on a daily basis for over a month by the assistant coach and my colleagues. I was forced to leave. And I had to end my boxing career prematurely for obvious mental health reasons. In sport today, there is a talk of rebuilding the system, but without a third-party judicial inquiry to hold accountable the people who perpetuate the current abuse and culture, nothing will change. Adding a system will again be a temporary fix, as it has been in recent years. A commission of inquiry into the toxic culture of abuse across Canada is absolutely necessary in order to have the opportunity to build a system that will allow Canadian sport to live up to its potential through results and medals. Because that's what we all hope to see. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to committee members.
And Kara McCormick, you have the floor now for 5 minutes.
I'm from Vancouver, a longtime professional international soccer player and currently a member of PFA Canada, the first pro soccer player union in Canada. I'm here today to share my lived experience and called for a judicial inquiry into abuse in sport in Canada. In February 2019, I published a blog that went viral.
Take your time, Kara. Take your time.
It was called A Horrific Canadian Soccer Story, the story no one wants to listen to, but everybody needs to hear. It told the story of a giant cover-up in Canadian women's soccer for over a decade of a now convicted sex offender. In 2008, Bob Berardi was the most powerful gatekeeper in Canadian women's soccer as the head coach of both the Vancouver Whitecaps and Canada's under-20 national team. He was also an assistant coach at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. He was fired for sexual misconduct against teenage players after myself and others had reported his abusive behavior for over a year. Both the Whitecaps and Canada Soccer covered up Berarda's October 2008 termination, presenting it publicly as a mutual parting of ways, which allowed him to go back and coach teenage girls for another 11 years. He was suspended from coaching the day after I published my blog in February 2019. My blog detailed how between 2008 and 2019, myself and a small group of my former teammates collectively asked for help to get Berarda off the field over 30 times, to no avail. How we went to the police. We wrote a letter to the Whitecaps owner, Greg Kerfoot, and two of his top executives. Plastered the soccer complex Berarda worked out of with a hotline players could call if a coach made them feel uncomfortable. How we went to BC Soccer with a police report and a victim. Told the story and shared evidence with more members of Canadian media than I can count. How we were gaslit and harmed repeatedly. Telling our traumatizing story to people in a system we were told we could trust, but instead was designed to silence us. On a personal level, during this horrific decade, I struggled with depression, suicidal ideation, and felt stuck. It was heavy, dark, and everything felt hard. I hated returning to my hometown of Vancouver, and I struggled to be around what I once loved the most, the sport of soccer. Because how do you move on when you know there's a predator having access to young girls? And how does one go about feeling mentally okay living in a world where leaders are actively allowing this to happen? When I hit publish at 8 a.m. Monday, February 25th, 2019, I was exhausted, terrified, and alone. Broken from a system that I've since learned was designed to break me, forcing me to choose between my own safety as a whistleblower and the safety of the teenage players Berarda remained on the field with. After I posted my blog, it quickly went viral. Soon after, other former Whitecaps and U20 national team players publicly shared their experiences, and most importantly, victims of Berarda finally felt safe to come forward. Last month, Berarda was sentenced to 2 years in prison for sexual crimes against 4 former teenage players over a 20-year period. The last victim was from 2008, the year he was fired from both the Whitecaps and Canada Soccer. Considering the insanity, lengths, and harms of what we had to go through to get a now convicted sex offender off the field, the question I continually ask myself is how many more Berardas are out there in this flawed system? How many more athletes are still being harmed? Yet the worst harm I experienced in the Canadian sports system came after my time on a field with Berarda. Abuse does not happen without enablers, and let me be explicit about our flawed system that covers up and enables abuse as well as re-victimizes athletes who come forward. A report into the cover-up of Berarda was commissioned by Canada Soccer and released in September 2022. Victor Montagliani and Peter Montopoli will both play a leading role in the taxpayer-funded FIFA World Cup that is coming to Canada in 2026 in their roles as the Vice President of FIFA and the CEO of the 2026 FIFA World Cup Canada, respectively. And both were named in that September 22 report as being directly involved in the cover-up that allowed a now convicted sex offender to have access to teenage girls for a decade. People like this have no place in sport, and we need mechanisms to remove them. Because what kind of message does it send to be rewarded leaders of taxpayer-funded sport while simultaneously covering up child abuse? On the financial side, a recently discovered entity called Canada Soccer Business, as well as the Vancouver Whitecaps separately, have leveraged what should be a public asset in Canadian soccer a public asset in Canada Soccer for the financial benefit of their private businesses. These inappropriate, harmful financial relationships fostered with no oversight to the detriment of players across the country on and off the field continue to this day. Andrea Neal, a longtime former player and coach with Canada women's national team, has also whistleblown on these same issues against Canada Soccer for years and has valuable information to share. It is also important to address an entire industry which has been built off the back of a distorted moral compass synonymous with the current state of Canadian sport, where groups like wolves in sheep's clothing lie. Examples include an Ottawa-based for-profit called ITP and a Toronto-based for-profit named Sport Law. People within both these groups have presented themselves as a safe haven for Canadian sport abuse victims, not disclosing that they have business relationships with the very institutions that are causing these same athletes harm. Let me use Sport Law as an example. Shortly after I published my blog in 2019, I was approached by a woman, Dina Bell LaRoche, who presented herself as someone passionate about women's issues in Canadian sport. I trusted and shared with her private details of our story. She did not tell me at any point that the company of which she was a partner, Sport Law, had relationships with the organizations that had harmed us. I would realize this violating conflict months later when her group was hired to do an independent investigation for the Vancouver Whitecaps into our case. I say independent in quotations to highlight another normalized lie in our current system. An investigation is not independent if it is paid for by the very institution that has something to lose with negative findings. I learned later in 2019 that Sport Law was also Ontario Soccer's legal counsel while running Canada Soccer's whistleblower hotline. You heard me right. In the aftermath of the cover-up of Berarda, Canada Soccer was telling soccer athletes if they'd experienced abuse, that a safe place to call was a hotline run by Sport Law, a group that was being paid to protect the legal interest of the largest PSO under Canada Soccer. What is clear to me in my lived experience in the Canadian sport system, what is clear to me in my lived experience in the Canadian sport abuse space is that we have lost touch with what is right and what is wrong. So let me say it clearly here today to those involved with ITP, Sport Law, and other groups engaging in the above behavior. It is not okay to present yourself to vulnerable, abused athletes as a safe place to share information, only to weaponize that information for the benefit of your businesses. It is a horrendous re-victimization that far too many of us have faced, and this kind of unethical, conflict of interest behavior is one of many reasons why trust has been completely broken in the current Canadian sports system. I am here today to say enough is enough. The problem is not single bad apple coaches. It is a system that empowers abusers, harms and silences victims with no ability to safely report outside of the system, and offers no consequence to sport leaders who enable abuse. And if we are serious about eradicating abuse, then we have to start treating the sport crisis as a human rights crisis it is, and implement change to make accountability, transparency, integrity, and basic human rights at the heart of our system. Systemic change means shining a light into the financial relationships that preserve power and uncovering and dismantling these relationships and systems that protect Canadian sport institutions at the expense of athletes' lives. Groups like OSIC are not the answer, as they are riddled with the same conflicts of interest and people as described above. Only a judicial inquiry into abuse in Canadian sport with a broad scope will shine a necessary light on the harm of the past while rebuilding trust for a better future. Because as I said in the closing lines of my 2019 blog, which sadly still remains true today, what we experienced and where we are now is still so far from good enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you for bringing forward your opening comments. What we'll be doing now is we'll be going from party to party and asking our questions. We will be starting off with a 6-minute round. So Dominique, 6 minutes to start. We'll be starting off with Dominique Vienne for this. Go ahead. Dominique, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to both of our witnesses for being with us today. I'm quite emotional. What we're hearing is shocking, and it undermines our trust in organizations that are supposed to have a good reputation. They promote excellence and things like that. What you're describing to us, is that only the tip of the iceberg? Ms. De Silva and Ms. McCormick, if you'd like to add afterwards, of course. Do you believe that it's the tip of the iceberg? Yes. The situation is a situation that can be found throughout the Federation. My situation is something that is still happening today. I heard stories as early as yesterday. Something similar with new athletes coming from the Olympic Games and who are having difficulties receiving their carding. Do you have anything to add, Ms. McCormick, on this situation in our sports teams and our sports world? Is this only the tip of the iceberg, what we've heard up until now?
Yeah, I echo what Miriam says. I've spoken to so many different athletes across different sports throughout this entire thing, and I can say that absolutely across sports there are so many broken people from our Canadian sports system, and this truly is, you could line up even just people that I've spoken to over the last years since I published my blog, and we would be here for days listening to stories.
Selon vous, Madame Rondeau,
In your view, Ms. Rondeau, who would benefit from this horrible system? Who benefits from it? Why do people protect each other, close their eyes, put their heads in the sand? Sorry to interrupt you. Last week, there was a witness that said they were protecting a label or a brand. Answer. It benefits the people in power and the people who are looking for power. They have no interest in sport. They have interest in power. The current system feeds that type of search for power. So it only benefits those who are looking for it. It doesn't benefit the sport, the athletes, or our representation internationally. It only benefits those who are looking for power, and sport is only an excuse. Question. What can these people gain from hiding situations as you've described them? Answer. Power. That's the only benefit for them. Power. Feeling in control. Sport is something significant. It's a source of pride. And when someone can control that, they feel satisfied. Miss McCormick, how are you today?
How am I? Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful to be here. It's been a very long journey, obviously. Like, this has been going on for us since 2007. So, yeah, I'm very grateful that just that there's finally, like, it feels like people that can do something about it are listening, because it has been a very long, dark, hard road, and it has to change. And that's why, for me personally, I flew across the country, putting myself in a really vulnerable situation to try to, put a face on the harm. I have been harmed. My friends have been harmed, and it's not just with what we experienced as athletes, it's the aftermath of trying to report a literal sex offender and what we had to go through. So, I think that's the biggest message from a mental health perspective. Before I wrote the blog to after I wrote the blog, like, I was an absolute mess for those 10 years, and I didn't understand what the harm was. And now I obviously realize it's the trauma of being gaslit for 10 years, reporting children in danger and nobody listening, and thinking that it was a system that actually cared about me as a person and cared about children. So since I wrote the blog, and now just, again, even connecting with other people like Miriam, and you feel isolated and alone, and like you're the problem, you're a troublemaker, you're by yourself. And so I think to feel validated and heard, and, even an awful community that we have now between athletes that have experienced the same thing, I feel a lot better despite looking like this right now.
We're good.
C'est terminé.
Yeah, you're finished.
My time is up.
Mais les autres ont d'autres bonnes questions aussi.
I'm sure there will be other good questions. Thank you.
And just as I say, take your time, everybody. We're getting through this, and thank you so much for flying across the country. It really does matter, because it's going to make our study much stronger. So thank you so much for doing so. I'm now going to pass it over to Jenna Suds for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Jenna.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to both of you for being here and for sharing your stories, which are so important for us to be hearing and learning from. My first question, and for both of you, if you'd like to answer it, is what do you believe we should be exploring to put in place to better protect athletes like yourself? It's a big question, I know.
Avant de mettre en place,
Before putting in place anything, you'd need to see what's been done. And from that investigation, you can start to wonder what should be implemented. I don't think that for now we can answer the question of what needs to be implemented as long as we haven't examined the situation in sports in Canada.
I would add, I completely agree with Miriam, and I think also what's been particularly striking through all of this is just how, as athletes, we have no resources. We're up against NSOs, they have money, they have power, they have control, and as athletes, again, even coming forward, there's no support, and I think it's just any time in society that you have a group that has unfettered access to power, they know they're going to have no opposition, like Miriam said earlier. It attracts a certain personality. And I truly believe, again, I completely agree with her, that we have to have a judicial inquiry to understand the full scope of what has happened. And then I think from there, something needs to be put in place that is actually outside of the sports system and that is completely focused on the athlete and their rights, and just on a logical level to have that balance that completely is non-existent right now.
If I can add, when we talk about resources, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we're not talking about groups or systems in place. When we're talking about resources, we're talking about power and money. And the federations and sports in Canada have that, whereas athletes do not. It's not a new system funded by sports in Canada that will help us to build something better.
And thank you very much for both of those answers. The other piece that I'd love to ask a bit more about that you had mentioned, Kara, was around needing to shine a light on the financial relationships. So you mentioned sport law and ITP, and this is something we haven't heard yet at this committee. And it's a bit shocking, frankly. And so, I'm trying to get my head around that and think about how, what tools or what is needed in order to stop that, in order to ensure that obvious conflict doesn't exist and that athletes are protected. And you spoke very eloquently and very knowledgeably on that topic. And I'm wondering if you have suggestions there of how that could be stopped.
I think, again, it boils down to the athletes having a group that's advocating solely for the athletes, because I think, again, unfortunately, people don't have the moral compass, and it is about business and money. And if they can exploit the athletes' information to gain traction in their business on the side that does have the money and power, unfortunately, people make that choice to engage in that conflict of interest. So again, I think there needs to be a group that's advocating for the athletes, because I think it's also important to mention that, when you come forward, you don't have any experience or background, and you are like in this whirlwind, and people are reaching out to you. And if somebody, again, if you don't know the lay of the land, it's easy to kind of, someone approaches you, you think that they're there to help you. You would never think that they would have, or you don't even know about this whole underbelly that's protecting the institution of sport. And it's super easy to just get sucked in. So that's, again, where I think it's so important that we have that balance in the system, that when you come forward, like the way that I came forward, the only reason why even mentally I got through the first month was just by chance that my friend was friends with Jen Simard, who was a whistleblower in the Alpine Canada case, and she was on the phone with me for a full month. I've never met her in person, but she supported me. But there needs to be like a formal body that does that, and I think then if there is a group protecting the athletes, then they're not going to be susceptible to organizations that are coming at them in their time of vulnerability, that are going to use their information to exploit and gain contracts with the institutions. And unfortunately, at this point, it's all so unregulated that that's happening all the time.
Okay, thank you. I have 20 seconds. The other thing, very briefly, I wanted to dig on was, Miriam, you had mentioned the balance in those at one point early on where you were balancing work and this requirement to still obviously make a living while training. And I'm wondering if you can speak to whether that's the norm or how do we fix that? How do we balance that better for athletes?
Yeah, that's the norm for a lot of federation. And pour être complètement honnête,
And to be completely honest, I would have preferred to continue my lifestyle where I could go train before work, teach, and then train after work with a coach that I could trust and a team that supported me. It's not the workload that wears on us when we're athletes. It's the people who are around us. We become vulnerable to those who are around us when our resources are taken from us. So you're worried about athletes and balancing work and sport. I think that isn't currently the priority. I think I can speak for most athletes. We're very good actually at balancing our work and sport balance. We get better every year with experience. The problem really is when that balance is removed from us. Teaching was what allowed me to find balance between work and sports. Teaching is something that I am as passionate about as sports. So taking that away from me forcefully was something that was very difficult. But I didn't have the choice if I wanted the karting. There are rules that make it so that we can't find balance if we want to be full-time athletes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're now going to pass it over to Adrienne LaRoche. Adrienne, 6 minutes.
Mesdames, vous...
Ms. De Silva, Rondeau, Ms. McCormick, I would like to add my voice to my colleagues and thank you for being with us today. And I just want to let you know that I am proud of you. You are part of the change that we are hoping to build. Ms. McCormick, in your opening remarks, you mentioned ITP and sport law that work with athletes, and you called them wolves in sheep's clothing. And you gave examples on sports law. Do you want to give us examples on ITP as well?
I know from speaking with athletes across multiple sports that they are approached by ITP and have shared private information about their cases, again, under the idea that the person approaching them is someone that's sympathetic to their situation. And then they have found, again, months later, weeks later, that organization is now representing and working with the NSO. And I think, again, it's not my stories to share. And I think it's also why it's really important to be opening this up to an inquiry, because I can tell you that multiple sports that I know that this has been a practice in. So again, but I really implore the committee to reach out to athletes and to hear the stories, because I think you're only going to find further evidence to what we're both saying.
si je peux me permettre, Madame Larouche.
If I may, Madame Larouche, that was the case for me. I made complaints to ITP Sport, and currently they are working with the Federation in order to do a review of the culture of the organization. So I reached out to them as an organization, and now they are working for the Federation.
Et c'est ces liens-là.
And it's those links that you don't trust, correct? Yes, Miss McCormick. And thank you, Ms. De Silva, for your comments. Ms. McCormick, the leaders at Soccer Canada, have they been held accountable for their disgracious acts towards athletes like you when we are expecting to have the 2026 Cup in Canada? The system put in place by Soccer Canada, has it changed? And do you think that Soccer Canada wants to bring about true change in its way of carrying out and doing things?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we still, again, through a private donation, are trying to get even therapy money from Soccer Canada. There's so many conflicts of interest that have been, with the Hockey Canada information that was coming forward and pressure on Soccer Canada. There needs to be a full financial review into Soccer Canada, because I think it's a part of the greater issue with Canada Soccer in the sense that they have had no oversight both towards finances and moral. And just as an example, the Vancouver Whitecaps have a relationship as a private organization with Canada Soccer, and that played a role in terms of concentrating power. And so there's all these different very problematic financial relationships that I think were starting to come to light prior to the World Cup for the men when they went on strike. And I think absolutely Canada Soccer has done nothing in any way, shape, or form to have any kind of reparations for the harm that we went through. And I think there has to be financial oversight and examination into, again, there's a lot of taxpayer money going into FIFA 2026, and there was so much harm done in our situation that hasn't been remedied in any capacity. And I think I really, really implore you to speak to somebody like Andrea Neal, who she has whistleblown and seen things firsthand and has information to share. And again, I think the financial part of it is tied in with the harm that we're experiencing as athletes, and I think it's a piece in terms of a judicial inquiry.
Oui, puis d'ailleurs,
And when we talk about funding, we heard during the Hockey Canada hearings that there was funding that had been hidden. Do you believe the Canada Soccer business also hid funding from Canadians and their members?
Absolutely. I think that this is a private entity that's been set up. It's off the back of the asset of Canada Soccer. It's marketing and sponsorship money that is going into a private organization that nobody knows. In this country, we don't have a professional or even a national league for women. We are one of the only countries in the world, that's in the top 50 rankings for FIFA. We're Olympic gold medalists, and we don't have this basic thing. And we are always told as female players there's not enough money, yet we have the highest participation, or one of the highest participation of female players in the world, but somehow there's no money. And so absolutely, Canada Soccer business is a complete red flag in terms of a private entity, again, attached to a national sport organization. And again, I think it's so important on so many different levels, if we truly want change, that's investigated.
mesdames, pour terminer,
Just to conclude my first round, I would like to hear you first, Ms. De Silva Rondeau. You say that you don't trust certain systems without there being, and there needs to be an independent investigation, and we need to see what was done in order to move forward. Why is this inquiry so crucial for moving forward? We're talking about building a system, and in order to build a system, we need to work on something that is clean. We can't build on something that's dirty. We want to create something new. And so we need that platform. We're not trying to fix things that for too long have been broken.
We're now going to pass it over to Leah Gazan, who is online. So Leah's online there. And so Leah, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm so sorry I can't be with you in person today. I just want to start out by thanking both of you for sharing your testimony. I want to acknowledge that it's difficult to share stories, particularly with the experiences that you've had not being heard or believed. And I want to start out by saying I believe both of you. And I want to thank you for being here today. This question is actually for both of you. I'd like both of you to respond to it. We've directly heard from you today, other witnesses that have come before this committee, about how calling out abuse in your sport, when there's abuse in sport, how it impacts you personally. And I know today, Madame Rondo, you spoke about how there's lots of supports and resources, but nobody to hold them accountable. And I think you've both provided examples of organizations that were supposedly there to help you that had clear conflicts of interests being on both sides. And it's very clear to me that this has come. This wanting justice has come at a great emotional cost for yourselves, for your friends, for your teammates, for your reputations that have often impacted your career. And I looked up an article. It's actually from The Guardian. It says, and in regards to what you shared, Madame McCormick. The title is Sexual Abuse in Sport. FIFA backs executives after failure to tell players about sexually abusive coach. So, when you were speaking about how you come forward with abuse, and then you're not believed, resulting in abuse of other individuals, children, young people, we need to change that. And I just want to read that. And then I'd like you to, I have a couple of questions. It said, FIFA has backed senior officials within its organization after failure to tell players and the public the real reason why now convicted sex offender and former national team coach Bob Baranda left soccer in 2008. The official Victor Matagalani, the president of CONCACAF, and FIFA vice president, and Peter Motopoli, the chief operating officer for Canada for the 2026 World Cup, were senior Canada soccer officials with central roles in Baranda's exit from his job as Canada's U20 women's national team coach after he was found to be acted inappropriately with his own players still in high-ranking positions. I want to ask you two questions. One, how can we protect survivors, victims, and witnesses, even in this committee, from further abuse as you come forward once again and put your safety, and I include emotional safety on the line? And what can we do so that future survivors can be allowed to speak their truth safely without subjecting them to further pain and further re-victimization? So I have that question for both of you. Thank you.
Je crois que pour nous protéger sur la place publique,
I think that in order to protect us, we would need to have external legal resources. I was sued by the high performance director following calling things out on social media, and I received a formal notice, and I had to pay for lawyers out of pocket. And so it's very difficult when you think, well, I'll share things publicly, but then we might be sued.
I, again, completely agree with Miriam. I mean, I think in terms of FIFA, still harboring people that were directly involved in our case, I think just, again, like on a societal level, to say that it's not okay, and again, to find a way to break these relationships that essentially for us for 11 years just all closed in on each other, and just whether we went to the media or soccer organizations or whatever, everybody was in bed with each other. Everybody was protecting each other. We had nowhere to go. Even in the sense of what can we do when people come forward, like therapy, it's like I was lucky enough to have the resources to have a lot of therapy over COVID, which completely changed things for me. But that was an absolute privilege and not a right. And I was completely harmed by our sports system for 10 years. So I think, again, those sort of resources like support, even just, I mean, those are just the sort of things where you're so siloed and you're up against these massive organizations and these people and power, and there's just nothing on the other side. Like Miriam said, like again, people are signed to NDAs, even that want to speak out with the Canada soccer situation, board members, former coaches. I know people directly that do want to speak to the kinds of things that have gone on, but they're under NDAs and they're afraid to speak because there are legal ramifications for them doing so. These are all things that, again, I think it's just very important that we send a message that it's not okay. Groups like FIFA are not above just basic human rights and treating people properly, and athletes should not have to go through this. And I would love nothing more than if the 11 years that we were silenced turned into Canada being a strong voice and a strong leader to say that this is not okay, and you're coming into our country, our taxpayers' money with your event, and you are harboring people that were a part of covering up for a sexual predator, and that's not okay. And I just think support, like that's what's completely lacking. Legal, emotional, all of it is what there's just absolutely none of currently. And I just think that alone needs to change.
Perfect. So we're going to do our next round, but as you can see, I'm kind of just being as flexible as possible. So we have 15 minutes for our last round. So it's 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 2.5 minutes, 2.5 minutes, and that's how we'll end today. So if you want to share your time during that 5 minutes, happy, joyful, do your thing. But I'm going to pass the floor over first to Michelle Ferrer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much to our witnesses for being here. Really appreciate it. I know a lot of people really appreciate what you're doing. It's a lot of responsibility to be the voice of many, so I really appreciate you being here. It is very emotional and tough to hear, so I can only imagine how tough it is to relive it and say it, so thank you. I want to talk, Miriam, if I may ask you touched on something that I was really interested. You said there's no systems in place. How do we enforce accountability? And, and is it Kiera? Kiera. You also said national judicial inquiry, which is what you guys have both asked for, over 30 times. That's really shocking to hear that number. But you caught both of these comments kind of overlap. That's why I'm asking kind of both of you. But you said it's not just bad apple coaches. That really jumped off the page for me, because I do think some people think that predators will be drawn to wherever children are, right? And to your point about power, Miriam, those very powerful comments as well. What will a national inquiry do to address the system? Because it's the no systems in place, Miriam, that you said. If you both want to touch on what I've said here.
I think the national inquiries, pardon, je fais les deux langues.
I think that we'll be able to clean house. And it'll give us a better idea of the state of things. It'll shed a light on the situation. We'll be able to shed a light on all the links in these sports federations and the systems that are supposed to protect us. So we'll have to clean up and hold people accountable, specifically those who are making this so toxic.
I think, again, in terms of what would a national judicial inquiry accomplish, I think what I mentioned before was just the fact that I can see that there's just such a lack of understanding of or acknowledgement of what is right and what is wrong. And I think what my blog served to do, at least, was like this: everybody in Vancouver that was in elite level soccer knew some version of misconduct that had happened. And I think when you have that kind of transparency, you have accountability, and you can't hold people accountable and change things if you don't even know the full scope. And I'm telling you that we reported over 30 times. Like that's a fact. We were just sitting in the lobby discussing different stories that we've heard, and it's shocking. And I think that was part of the harm that we experienced, was that we knew, like, what's out there is so shocking and horrible and awful, but yet the reaction that you're getting back is just not matching. It's classic gaslighting, right? And it's so harmful. And I just think that that's what's important with this. Like, we have to understand what the harm is in order to start to remedy it. And we have to set clearly what's right and what's wrong. And I think sometimes things are so convoluted in the current system with power and conflicts of interest and whatever, that I sometimes, to give people the benefit of the doubt, maybe they don't even see how shocking it is. But I can tell you from living within it, it's horrendous.
You're well said. And I think the base for normal, when you're living in it, you don't know any different, right? So I think that's often shocking for a lot of people. Last question. Has there ever been a call before for a national judicial inquiry? And if yes, why do you think there hasn't been one to date?
I just think to this point, we've been so silenced and siloed. And I just think as athletes, again, we've spoke about it before we came here, finally, even again, just to listen and connect with athletes in different sports. And again, for so long, I felt like I was a troublemaker. I was a problem person for speaking up. I'm siloed while these organizations and the people that are causing this harm can hide behind the veil of an organization. I'm, standing in front of everybody with this big allegation, So I think that's, we've had no power as athletes. We've had, you get broken by the system, and then you just want nothing to do with sports or your experience or whatever. And I think that's to this point what's gone on, where it's like we just haven't been collectively together to even know each other's experiences, to know we're not crazy, that this is actually, our experiences happening in different versions in other sports. So, I just also don't think that our voices have been amplified to the level that they're being amplified now. And again, this massive system has suppressed all of us, and I feel like we're all starting to rise above. And I would hope now that people understand the full scope of what we've been through. And I would hope now that people would feel like this cannot continue and we have to change this, and we have to hear every story and understand fully the conflicts of interest that have allowed this kind of harm to happen.
There's not been one asked of that you know of?
Well, wasn't there? There was a call for it last week, right?
Call for action last week, yeah.
But just last week.
Yeah. We'll now pass it over to Anita Vandenbelt. Anita, 5 minutes.
Thank you. And I really want to thank both of you for being here. It's not easy to give this kind of testimony. And what really strikes me is we're hearing this now across different sports. So this is clearly systemic. And what I'm really touched by and horrified by, actually, is the fact that you were not just victimized by what happened to you, but by the fact that when you tried to stop it from happening to other people and other children, you weren't heard. And the idea that the very people who were meant to protect you were weaponizing your information, we're gaslighting and shaming you, is something that we need to make right. And the fact that nobody listened, I just want you to know we're listening. So thank you for being.
And it's very healing,
Thank you.
honestly.
On that, Ms. McCormick in particular, I want to ask you, you've talked about basically things you've cobbled together, informal peer networks, trying to get therapy where you can, mentions of not being able to access legal supports, different things that, being siloed and alone. There are organizations, there are places where if somebody comes forward with a testimony of something that happened to them, they're immediately given an advocate who can walk them through what they need. And we know that changes over time. And, given if it's therapy, if it's peer support, if it's legal support, if it's just advice about what the process is, but being an advocate for that child, for that person, what would that have looked like? Or maybe let's look at right now for a young girl who is in soccer or in boxing. If the system worked properly, what would it look like when that young girl comes forward? What would a good system look like?
I think the first thing is education. I think there was so many situations as an athlete that I just thought it was consequence of being an outspoken person, and I got benched or I had bad things happen to me. So I think I learned 2 years ago that that's a form of abuse called neglect, and I think that's my big question. Why are we not educating children and parents as to what does abuse look like? You're never going to eradicate predators. They're always going to be there. But it's again, there's ways that you can, mitigate the damage that they're going to do. So I think that's the first thing is you need to empower children to know. And then I think once, you have to have a safe place to report. Like I said, for 11 years, we literally I described every possible, to the point of postering up the, sports complex where he was. And, and it was just, again, nothing, right? So I just think there has to be some kind of an entity that is removed from sport, because I think the biggest thing to recognize is that institutions are liable for abuse. So they don't want to empower that is a fundamental issue in the system. So I think, again, in order to mitigate that, you have to have an entity outside of anything to do with liability from the institution that provides legal support, therapy, peers that have been through it that can, help walk them through the steps that they need, educate them as to this was abuse that happened to you, this was a criminal situation that happened to you. And again, I honestly truly believe that if there was that kind of balance in the system, a lot of these power hungry coaches and predators and whatever probably wouldn't do half of what they do. And I think also athletes, again, wouldn't be harmed for the 11, my soccer career in Vancouver ended in 2008. It's 2022 and I'm still talking about this, it should have been done in 2008. He should have been investigated. Mm-hmm. He should have gone to prison. And yet so many of us for the last 14 years still have this situation running our lives, and, so I honestly truly believe that if those sorts of things, again, it has to be outside the system. Again, and we have to treat it as a human rights thing as opposed to a sport thing, because I think it's gotten so convoluted and the harm is so deep.
Yeah, he should have been, and it is a human rights issue. And, these are children.
100%.
Children cannot know these things. This is something that we need to protect the children. Thank you. I wanted to also give Ms. De Silva a chance to answer what a good system would look like.
I completely agree with Chiara, with the outside system that needs to be in place. As you said, there are children, they don't know. Yeah. Even as adults, we don't know. It's a complicated system when we get into sports. And make no mistakes, 30 complaints, that's not a lot. I did more than 10 in 2 years. And I was in that system for 12 years. So multiply that by 12. And I'm one person. Imagine all of those athletes that have done the same. So 30 may look a lot, but it's kind of the norm. And nothing is done year after year. So, yes, and I am, as Chiara said, she is still going through it. It's been 2 years. I'm still going through it. I pay my own therapy. I pay my own medication. There's no support for that. It's thousands of dollars. I am a teacher. I am passionate about kids and helping them and giving them hope. And it's kind of getting hard to give them hope when I see no change happening. I just hope that, I don't know what to say to a kid that is abused right now. And I'm a teacher. It's kind of, I feel guilty for that. I don't know what to say to a kid that's been abused because I've been abused and I didn't have any resources that was efficient. So what am I supposed to say to a kid that comes to me and telling me all those things because I know the system is not working? Am I supposed to say to him the same thing that happened to me? Like, go complain to that system? I know it won't work. I can just stay there and look at this failing over and over again. It's just, this is part of me. It's hard. I don't know what to do. Well, I want to do more. I want to be involved. But for your answer, what needs to be a perfect system for a kid that is going through abuse for now? The answer is I don't know.
Well, you being here is changing things. So
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. We're now going to pass it over to Adrienne. Adrienne, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a new mother to a little girl, thank you for being here, and thank you for being part of the change. I don't have a lot of time, so we know that Sport Canada is currently reviewing its policies. We should see that in February. Were you consulted, and do you know any other athletes who were consulted for that policy?
I personally don't, and I just also want to put it out there that I hate the word policy because I think, again, our case shows that you can have a million policies out there, and if you don't have people with moral fortitude to follow through with the policies, or you don't have systems in place in order to force those policies into place, I think personally policies are a waste of time. Again, they're nice decoration on a website, but the reality, again, at ground zero for an athlete is that they do nothing. So... And I can say, again, in terms of Sport Canada, again, I think they're in the system. They're a part of the problem. I don't necessarily think that they're the answer even to be doing the policies, but I think maybe Miriam knows. So, yeah, to answer your question, no, there was nothing from Sport. I had nothing to do with Sport Canada or wasn't asked or anything.
Même chose de mon côté.
Same thing for me. The policy, that's words that are well woven. But they don't represent anything concretely. There are loads of policies. It's complicated to follow them. So when we're in the system, as an athlete, it's hard to understand what they mean. It's not clear. For young athletes, and even for adults, it's not clear to understand all these policies. And when we send in a complaint, we get lost in the complexity of the system. But no, we were not consulted. I'll try to be very quick. There will be the World Cup in Canada. We talked about human rights. And Ms. McCormick, you talked about abuses, but I would like to come back to a question that was asked. Are you shocked to see that Peter Moncoli is representing Soccer Canada nationally and internationally?
No, in terms of how broken the system is, it seems like he's a perfect representation that shows everything as to where we're at currently. So unfortunately, I think he's a perfect figurehead for how broken Canada soccer is and how athletes have been treated within the organization.
We're now going to pass it over for our last round to Leah Gazan. Leah, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and alarming testimony, but we knew about this. This is the thing. I mean, you're talking about systems, but, let's talk about the abuse of gymnasts. This is something that has been in the news forever. In terms of human rights violations in FIFA, it's in the news all the time, and so I think, we talk about sports organizations, but we also have responsibility as elected officials to put in laws to protect people. And I wanted to read a quote from Leanne Nicole, and it's from an article from this past April in The Guardian about the investigation of sexual misconduct. And she says this, and I want to hear your perspective on this. She said, the only people in the system with moral courage are the athletes, said Leanne Nicole, a former soccer board member who was also previously executive director of the Canadian Olympic Foundation. And then she goes on to say this, repercussions need to be higher for people not willing to have moral courage. It's not just the perpetrators who are the issue, it's the enablers. And I wanted to hear your thoughts about what she had to say.
If the administrator had the courage that we have, they would have launched a judicial investigation long time ago in their own federation. We asked for that in boxing. We asked for that investigation 3 times. 3 times it was rejected by the board. So, yes, if they had, the only person in the federation who have courage is the athlete in sport.
And just to ask, what struck me about and again, part of the system, she said it's not just the perpetrators, it's the enablers, like the bystanders, all the people that know about this and continue not to act. What do you think should be done about that? Some of the consequences for that?
So I'm just going to say here, we have only a very short time now to finish these last few questions. So this will be the end. So go ahead and finish up.
I think that it's really important to recognize that there always is going to be abusers. And I think, unfortunately, people care about themselves and their own survival and their institutions and themselves and how they look ahead of doing the right thing. And unfortunately, I probably wouldn't have had such a negative viewpoint and jaded viewpoint before all this, but that's currently exactly how I feel. And I think we need laws. Like, I think we need to recognize enablers with the same gravity that we do with abusers, because at the end of the day, even in our situation, if somebody had stepped up in 2008 and done the right thing, this wouldn't have gone on as long as it did. And it did go on because of those people and all the people that, continued to silence us as we came forward again and again and again. So I think we need to have laws that, again, there are consequences, because unfortunately, that's the only way I think that you're going to change behavior, is if people are going to personally have ramifications for their bad behavior. Because I think, again, we have a long, long history now to show of harm being done off of people making the choice themselves whether to do the right thing or not.
Awesome. Thank you so much. On behalf of the committee, I would really like to thank Kiara and Miriam for being here and sharing your stories. I'm just going to remind you, if there's any assistance that you need, please feel free to call to our Status of Women office. If there's any supports, anything like that, we're here to support you. Thank you so much. We're going to suspend just for seconds so that we can start our new panel. Next panel. Thank you. Suspend. This meeting now, and I would like to welcome, as an individual, we have Francois Lemay, who is here in the room with us, and from the Coaching Association of Canada, Lorraine Lafreniere, Chief Executive Officer for the Coaching Association of Canada. I'm just going to remind you, I'm sure, Lorraine, if you're looking for the French, it's on the bottom if you're looking for anything there. And you know on here, if you, French and English, there's the interpretation on our pieces here. I'm now going to pass the floor over to Francois Lemay for a 5-minute opening comment. Go ahead, Francois.
Thank you very much, Chair FEWO. My name is François Lemay. Je vais aller en français. Mon nom est François Lemay.
I'll speak in French. My name is François Lemay, and I would like to thank Ms. Larouche for inviting me and for having convinced me to come today. After listening to today's testimonies, I would like to say that I am here today with great humility. I have more than 30 years of volunteer work and sport management in Quebec. Behind me, I don't have the same experience as Ms. Lafreniere, who is the coach of coaches in Canada. And I have not had to demonstrate the courage of Ms. McCormick or Ms. De Silva Rondeau. But I have experience in the field, and I coached both girls, boys, and mixed teams. In the last few months, I became an unofficial spokesperson for parents outraged by Hockey Canada. We were the first to speak out against the National Federation by refusing to pay our dues. A lot of time has passed since then, but little concrete progress has been made. We were few to speak out against Hockey Canada, but we were stunned to learn that the Canadian government was virtually powerless against the National Federation with no direct leverage, just money and public opinion. Worse, we saw the failure of Sport Canada, rightly denounced by Justice Cromwell in their role as a toothless watchdog. So I ask you, who is watching the watcher? Especially when the issues are so deep. As a parent, I am involved 12 months a year in my children's sports schedule, training camp, practice, games, and it's disheartening to see that neither our federal government nor its delegate Sport Canada can directly intervene. It's very disappointing. We don't have time. We're on the field 4 to 5 times a week. We don't have time to deal with the governance of our national bodies. We believed we could trust in an institution like Sport Canada, but in light of recent events and testimonies, clearly that's not the case. In fact, the problem of amateur sport in Canada is precisely in the word amateur. The bulk of Canadian sport development rests on the shoulders of volunteers who work in good faith but have limited resources and experience. In Europe, they have civil clubs. In the United States, they have a network that takes shape mainly in high school. In Canada, we have a mix of both, but we lack professionalization. Organizing a tournament, registration, a budget, these are all things that experienced volunteers can do. But building a sport program based on a long-term athlete development, managing abuse and harassment fairly, establishing governance and organizational transparency, developing a strategic plan for women's sports, all of that takes time, experience, and training. What we see in the upper echelons originated somewhere. The toxic culture didn't magically appear. It was allowed to grow out of inexperience and lack of resources. Even if the goodwill is there, amateur sport is mostly defined by successive cohorts of parents, which leaves too much room for error and abuse. If we want to concretely improve and help the Canadian sport, and by definition help women's sport, which has enormous potential, the various governments must commit to supporting volunteers. We need to professionalize amateur sport, fund volunteer training for governance and for the development of their sport. It's not normal, for example, that the Canadian women's handball team has to raise funds to qualify for the Pan American Games. In the same way that it's not normal that volunteers have to investigate and follow up on possible abusive coaches. We expect a lot from our athletes. We ask a lot of our volunteers, but we offer very little or nothing. To achieve this, we could start by excluding from taxes the first $5,000 of income made in arbitration or league management. The federal and provincial governments could also agree to directly fund amateur sports clubs. We could also reform Sport Canada and its mandates. But above all, there needs to be cohesion in amateur sport. There are a lot of players around the table with ill-defined roles. The more amateur sport is divided, the more room there will be for mismanagement. Shaky leadership tends to hide when things are going badly, but everyone's available to get a trophy. I'm not talking about a wall-to-wall solution that would work for all sports. Each sport has its reality. In this regard, handball needs resources, while for field hockey, or for hockey, it's a matter of governance. Volunteers across Canada need your help. We need continuity, not to replace us, but to perpetuate our efforts, and especially to guarantee better safety of our young girls and boys. Canadian sports need to modernize. Thank you for your time.
Joining us online, I would like to invite Lorraine Lafreniere. If you want to help me with that pronunciation, that'd be fantastic. Lorraine, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I join you today from the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Je tiens à souligner le courage.
I want to acknowledge the courage of the victims and survivors who have broken the silence. We hear you. I, too, want to honor your bravery.
Sound the alarm as we've heard today. We are with you. The system requires wholesale cultural change. The only way to achieve this is through a national judicial inquiry. This is an issue of national importance, the baseline. An inquiry will create a public roadmap for united cultural change. We have seen similar mechanism used around the world in dramatic change to address systemic safe sport. I witnessed the power of the Dublin inquiry in 1988 after the Ben Johnson scandal. The legacy of that inquiry is that Canada is a leading anti-doping nation. Le mandat de l'association.
The mandate of the Coaching Association of Canada is to ethically guide the development of coaches and sports practitioners and to implement and promote a development program in association with federal, provincial, and territorial governments and national, provincial, territorial sports organizations. Currently, we train on average 50,000 individuals through the National Coaching Certification Program, from the community level to high performance. Safety and ethical principles are at the heart of the training offered to coaches. Since 2006, a coach must successfully complete the Making Ethical Decisions course to become certified.
In the last 3 years, we've worked with leading researchers to develop training in teen dating and gender-based violence, bystander empowerment, modeling healthy relationships, creating a positive sport environment, anti-racism. This work is supported by Sport Canada, Status Women Canada, and the Public Health Agency of Canada. In 2019, at the then request of Minister Duncan, we created mandated safe sport training to educate all sport participants. And as so eloquently spoken about previously, we need training and education to be part of it, yet that's not all. We also partner with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection to deliver training on grooming awareness. We work with Respect Group and Kids Help Phone. We relaunched the Responsible Coaching movement, which includes evidence-based prevention strategies in the Rule of Two and training and screening. We screen coaches for major games. We offer a designation for coaches, but coaching is not a regulated profession. Training and prevention programs I have spoken about are only one facet of safe sport culture. We are one organization. More is needed from us. More is needed for others from others. And that's why a national judicial inquiry is required. This is a complex issue. Canada does have great coaches, and coaches play a vital role in supporting athletes and participants, as we just heard. At times, they are the only trusted individual in a young person's life. But that's not why we're here today. The power imbalance in coaching is a huge problem. Professional standards are a huge problem across the country. Resources and the lack of them is a huge problem. Now, while we know that predators predominantly use the coaching role to abuse, it's also important to acknowledge that predators come in many forms and that it's not just the coach-athlete relationship. Dr. Larry Nasser, one of the most horrific long-term abuse cases. Pair skater John Coughlin, who sexually abused his partner, Bridget Namioka, who committed suicide. Parker Egbert, a 19-year-old swimmer with autism and an intellectual disability, just recently filed a lawsuit alleging that he was violently and repeatedly raped at the Tokyo Paralympics and at the National Training Center by a two-time Paralympic gold medalist. The recent assault of eight hockey players in 2018 and again at the 2003 Junior Worlds. If we fail to recognize that abusers come in many forms, we fail the system and we fail our athletes again. Enfin,
Finally, we respect provincial and territorial jurisdiction. However, if safe sport measures are to be effective, the federal, provincial, and territorial governments must join forces and create a national registry of all predators and offenders.
if there is no centralized registry or coordinated registries, then abusers and predators will continue to travel from sport to province to territory and to any role in sport which will set the stage for more abuse. So in short, mes trois demandes, qu'il y a une rencontre.
My three requests: that there be an investigation, that there is a focus on safe sport for all, and that the federal, provincial, and territorial governments create a registry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll be going around with our first round of questions and starting over with Anna Roberts for 6 minutes. Anna?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for speaking to us. I have a couple of questions, but before I ask my questions, I want to ask another thing. I know that the government has given money to ensure that the athletes have an opportunity. In 2021, they funded a sports dispute resolution, and I'm just going to assume here, by listening to the previous witnesses that we all heard, it's not working. I agree with our previous witnesses. The system is broken, and it's been broken for too long, and it doesn't appear. I'm ashamed, I'll be honest. I'm totally ashamed that we have not done more to protect our young people. But my two questions that I have for you are this. How do people become safe sport qualified? Number one. And what do you think about that? I'll throw that out to both of you.
Lafrenière, do you want to start?
Oui, merci, Monsieur Lemay.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lemay.
Well, I think we have a program called the National Coaching Certification Program that's invested by the federal government, the provincial and territorial governments. And while it's not perfect, it does focus on ethics. We do have training. It's not mandatory across the country in clubs and organizations across the country. It has a very solid penetration. We have about 50,000 coaches annually who might take one of our workshops, but it's by no means not enough. And with that education, there's this challenge that Monsieur Lemay brought up, which is the professional standards. It's not about one function and training and education and that one function. It's about the system and the professional standards and expectations that are across all functions in the organization. Monsieur Lemay?
If I may add, it's also a question of time. When you are, sports in Canada is based on volunteers. So between the suppers and the practice, you need to talk to the parents, explain what is an abuse case, what is harcèlement, what phone number you can use, what can be done, who to talk to. And sometimes those things are just pushed aside. There is a lot of good faith, but sometimes times is missing. So by having people being hired in clubs to do that and to be able to year after year to repeat it, to be guardians of the good faith, that would be very helpful, because as parents, we're lacking times to manage the sports of our kids.
But here's the issue. It's not working.
No.
Our children are still getting abused.
Yep.
We have not done them any justice, as we heard from our witnesses, and not just from these two witnesses, but from previous witnesses in all sports.
Yes.
The system is broken. They're tired of words. We need to seek action, because if we don't seek action, there's going to be more and more brutality, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not trying to be mean, but there's an issue here. So you're talking to me about training, and you're talking to me about, recertification. What good is recertification? What good is training if these abusers continue to abuse? Would you not agree? And I'm asking this, I'm trying to be, I'm sorry if I get a little passionate, but I'm quite upset about this today. Would you not agree that a registry must be completed so that these predators are put on a registry for the rest of their life and they don't abuse our children any longer?
I'm not a legal expert, but I definitely information needs to be shared. I'm not sure if a registry is the appropriate thing. I'm not an expert, but definitely if we have a recent case in Quebec about a basketball coach who went from one organization to another, and the information wasn't shared. So we need to find a way, definitely, to, like Ms. Lafrenière said, share the information within the sport and with the other sports as well.
But that's a criminal offense. If it's a criminal offense, then they should be charged. And it should be shared, because if they are charged criminally, then everybody has access to that.
See, that's a very good thing, because every year we have to do antécédent judiciaire for every single coaches or volunteer that is working with the kids in the organization. So everybody is going through their police criminal record. If you have a criminal record, you won't be coached. Or like one of my coach a couple of years ago, he had a DUI, drinking under effect, I think, under influence, but he was able to coach because it's nothing related to the kids. But if it was anything related to the kids, or he wouldn't be able to coach. So every single year we are screening all the coaches there is. But we are not screening the coach that are yelling, that are borderline. To have a criminal record, you need to be reported. You need to have a police investigation and everything. So that's highly complicated. But
so I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't agree. I don't think that it's that complicated. I think what we need to do to sports, whether it's recreational, professional, whatever, amateurs, these are children. These are our future. I think what we need to do is be accountable and put practices in place where we can automatically, without notice, check it out. So in private industry, coming from the financial industry, I never knew when the inspectors were coming in. So I knew that every single day I had to do my job ethically, morally, and respectfully. If we put those practices in place, and this is just one thing that I offer, this could stop the abuse. Sorry.
Don't be sorry.
Sorry.
We all care about this passionately. I get it. So I'm going to pass it over to Emanuela. I just make up your new name again. Emanuela, it's for you, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank both of our witnesses for being here with us today. Monsieur Lemay, nous avons...
Mr. Lemay, we heard from the other witnesses about efforts being done nationally. I believe that you work more locally. So I would like to ask, do you have any comments on,
I guess, at the local or provincial level, in terms of abuse? Have you heard of cases, and do you think that this is something that needs to be dealt with more than just at the national sports team level, but at every level? And can you speak a little bit to that experience?
It can be seen at every level. I'm going to speak in French if you don't mind, because it's a very specific question. Dans le monde...
Locally, and I worked a lot locally, I witnessed it. I worked on cases of abuse. I've had to manage cases of abuse. And what Ms. De Silva and Ms. McCormack explained very well, at the national level, we're seeing the roots of that at the local level. And the harm is the same. People who go up in the echelons started somewhere. They started locally. They didn't just happen into a national organization. So that's why training volunteers and having a professionalization is very important, because we'll be able to work on prevention. And I think it was Ms. De Silva Rondeau who mentioned it. It is the tip of the iceberg. All that we don't see is what's happening locally. Thank you. And I also read that you made a complaint to Hockey Quebec and stated that they needed to change their culture. Can you tell us if you received a response, and have you seen any changes since your complaint? I was able to speak with Mr. Thibault and of Hockey Quebec after the scandal of 2018. I can't say that I had an influence on what they did, but I spoke to them. I told them that the problem was much larger than they thought. In English newspapers, there were a lot of reports on Hockey Canada and how unacceptable it was. In Granville, we decided that we would not pay Hockey Canada, and that had a snowball effect. And hopefully that helped Hockey Quebec with their discussions internally, and they showed some leadership and put pressure on Hockey Canada, and I think they had some success. We saw that with the two presidents and the CEO leaving. And I would like to know, as our previous witness talked about education and the importance of educating children and their parents, and the importance of giving them power over themselves, do you believe that educating children in sports, educating their parents, and doing this with the coach and telling them what is appropriate and what is inappropriate, so that even the coach is very aware of the education that these children received? Do you believe that that could have an influence on coaches to not act abusively? Answer: yes, absolutely. The coach needs to be there because we're supposed to be a family, so there shouldn't be a dichotomy between the coach, who is often also a parent, and the children. Often coaches are trained. They receive ethic courses. I myself had to do that kind of training. But then how do we train our organizations? How do we have follow-ups with parents? Talking about ethics and abuse when we're talking about 6-year-olds is not the same with 14-year-olds. There needs to be an evolution in what is taught to children and parents. There needs to be a constant follow-up. But amateur sports is based on volunteering, so every 3-4 years, the local board changes, expertise is lost, and it's not a priority. Priority is getting the schedules, the shirts. We need to help our volunteers throughout Canada. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure how much time I have left, but
45
I'm going
seconds.
to ask. Okay, 45 seconds. I'm going to ask you to comment on what you think needs to change specifically, I guess, in the training of coaches, which you've said there's a lot of education regarding these different, but it's not regulated. So they're not necessarily forced to go through you, and they're not necessarily followed up with after they've passed their course. What recommendations would you make that coaches are required to have in order to work with children in terms of training and follow-up?
Honestly, I think the inquiry has to be asked that question, but I would suggest to you that the school system, which has coaches, has a formative role at a very early stage with students and student athletes that should be considered.
Thank you both very much. I know I probably only have 10 seconds left, so I just want to thank you for coming and informing us of your perspectives. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm now going to pass it over to 6 minutes for Adrienne LaRoche. Adrienne?
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, François, for your opening remarks. And rest assured, you do have your place here as a parent. And what you've said does add to our study. I would like to come back to certain things that you mentioned. We heard revelations of sexual abuse in the past few months, and I would like for you to talk about the culture of silence and toxic behavior that can be found in sports. Answer: it starts young. Often we trivialize sexual violence. It starts with a lack of education. Volunteers in Canada are not trained to deal with sexual abuse and harassment. something that starts in the back room and that gets worse. I have been trained for such a situation, but it's not necessarily that something that I'm comfortable with. But if you are a president at a plant, for example, you may not have the ability or the knowledge to deal with these things. So if we want to combat toxicity, yes, we need to make change, but we also need to talk about supporting people at the local level and supporting volunteers. Following cases of abuse of athletes, the sports minister received many questions from different stakeholders, but what do you expect of her and what do you expect of us? What a great question. I'll say it in English.
Faites-le.
Get it done. Work in collaboration with provinces. Ms. Lafrenière said it very well earlier. Work with schools. They are well placed to work with children in sports and work with sports clubs. We're examining a lot what happened with elite teams and nationally. But again, that started somewhere. And we need to look at all of the different steps in the life of an athlete. Start with the interests that they develop at 5 or 6 years old and go all the way to the elite level at 25, 30 years old. Question: what do you believe of the Commissioner of Integrity in Sports? Do they have what they need for independent investigations? And do you believe that athletes can trust that system? Because they have no power, no enforcement power, but they work with Sport Canada. Should things be done differently in order to rebuild trust? Ms. McCormack and Ms. De Silva Rondeau explained the problems with ITP and sports law. They explained the failure of Sport Canada as well. I think that in Canada and in the provinces there should be an independent entity to examine complaints for parents, for children, and for coaches, because coaches are sometimes victims as well. You are a local coach, correct? And the commissioner only focuses on high-level athletes. So there are other athletes that could be victims of abuse. In Quebec, there's Sport Aide. I've referred people to that organization that is increasingly well known, but I think we would need the equivalent in all provinces and territories. Having a commissioner, an independent commissioner, for example, and I think it's Ms. Vandebelt who explained it earlier, it's important to be able to receive support throughout the process, because to have someone there to help you during the complaint process could be positive. And I think that Ms. De Silva Rondeau also mentioned that because of all the policies, it's easy to get lost. And when you talk about athletes, you talk about independence in having an inquiry, as was the case with doping in Canada. Ms. Lafrenière explained it very well earlier. The Commission on Ben Johnson made Canada a leader in anti-doping, and we have a center for that here in Canada. I think that we need to do some introspection on amateur sports in Canada if we want to get results, and at all steps it will be difficult. We're going to learn things. we're going to see the shortfalls. Some are already very clear, but it is something that needs to be done.
Thank you very much. We're now going to pass it over to Leah Gazan for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much. And my first questions are for Madame Lafreniere. Excuse my ignorance, but I'm just trying to understand this. You were talking about certification for coaches. How are coaches currently licensed? Is it through the province?
So licensing is a different practice. So a license is used as a license to practice. So that's a different type of process that doesn't really exist. Some sports have it. Education, I would give you the analogy of the medical doctor goes to McGill University and gets their medical degree, but then they're in part of the regulated profession that gives them their license to practice.
Right.
When they're removed from their license to practice, they don't lose the degree from McGill, but they can't practice anymore. And that is missing.
Yeah, so that's where I want to go with this. So I'm a teacher by training. In order to become a teacher, because you were talking a lot about professional standards, and things like, for example, passing an abuse registry check, having to take certain courses to be able to do your job. These are things that, for example, and I use teaching as an example because we're working with kids, many kids who are vulnerable from diverse backgrounds. And so we have certain educational requirements, but also professional standards that have to be licensed by an independent body. You used a doctor. I would use the provincial education systems. Do you think if there was a separate licensing board that would help provide greater oversight and regulation to in sports?
Yeah, I think there's many ways that this could be created. A licensing board would absolutely regulate the ability to practice for all participants. When I talk about professional standards are really what set the tone for how a person should behave. Predators are so good at grooming people to make them think that, oh, I'm the best person, I'm the pillar of the community. And then it's shades of gray. They groom the gatekeepers, right? The clubhouse keymaster, the board member to think, and they blind them. Oh, no, that's just him. He likes to, or she likes to XYZ. And that's how predators work. They slowly push the boundaries pour agresser. And so what we need is the clear boundaries. And if the professional standards are there, then the barrels go up much quicker. And licensing is absolutely one way to achieve that.
So going there, and thank you for that, because I was thinking about that because there seems to be constant cases where there's conflict of interest. Like it's just a massive conflict of interest at all levels. Everybody who has testified today has spoken about the need for a national judicial inquiry. Would a national judicial inquiry help, for example, what we just discussed, talking about licensing, be able to look at things more closely so that we can kind of deconstruct a system that's clearly unsafe and reconstruct it into something safe? Do you think a national judicial inquiry would help with that? And if so, how?
Well, I'll give you a concrete example of what you just spoke about. In Ben Johnson, in the doping scandal, and there were others, they all knew each other. They all had a built-in relationship. They all knew each other. Oh, no, that person wouldn't do that. Or they had a cone of silence. It was one or the other. But the inquiry brought it to light and removed that from being an acceptable standard and created the independent agency that was charged with monitoring and investigating doping. And so, yes, a national inquiry would do that because it would remove what you aptly described, which is the familiarity we all have with each other in sport, which blinds us. Oh, that is a good person. They would never do that. Well,
Yeah.
that's actually how predators work. They're good people because that's their cloak.
Yeah, and there's no measure and there's no kind of impartial oversight that's looking over things. It sounds like House of Cards. Would you agree? Like if one person is caught, there's a whole slew of people implicated, so everybody's protecting each other. Is that? Because that's what I'm hearing over and over again.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, and whether they even realize they're doing that is another question, because predators manipulate everybody around them. It's a sick process, and that's why we have to set the professional standards in sport, because it's the only way you're going to remove or reduce predators from coming into the system.
Thanks very much, Leah. And I just have a couple questions. I'm just looking at the committee, a couple questions, and I'll share the rest of my time, if that's okay with everybody, with Michelle. Everybody good? Happy, joyful? Everybody's fine? Okay, so I actually want to ask you, Ms. Lafretiere. I'm just kind of looking at this and understanding how the national coaching certification, part of your job is doing the Safe Sport program, correct? Now, because I actually tried to go online. You know, when I'm doing research, I like to go online, see what I can do, and see if I can become a coach. And so I saw that was basically an online program for Safe Sport. Is that correct? So
There are.
Go ahead,
Madam Chair. There are many. There are in-person make ethical decision workshops, and there are online. There's synchronous, so in other words, with a person online with you, or asynchronous, so an e-learning that you would have seen.
Excellent.
And COVID has absolutely pushed us towards the online learning.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think one thing, because I did sit on Heritage Canada with a few of my colleagues in this room, that during the Hockey Canada scandal really opened up some doors and thoughts on how everybody is interrelated. And that takes me to the Coaching Association. Right now, the chair of your board associated with Hockey Canada, correct?
He was the vice president at Hockey Canada until about 2018.
Okay. And is he still associated with Hockey Canada?
He is not, that I know of. Does he do contract work? That's quite possible. But he's not an employee of Hockey Canada.
Yeah, I know nothing about this gentleman, and he may be the best guy ever. But I think what we're really seeing is that those relationships, and as many of our athletes have talked about, is that complex website. I've spoken to many people saying, you know, I protect my people too. That's what we do. I protect my family, and a lot of times in sports, it's family. You're not going to tell on your sibling in sport. You're going to protect. And I think that's some of my concerns, is that when I'm looking at the organizations, I look at these organizations and wonder, is Gymnastics Canada, who we're hearing hundreds of complaints for, are they part of this safe sport mechanism? Is this group from bobsled, are they part of it? And we're hearing from them. Are they the ones that are actually tops of these boards teaching these things? And at the end of the day, are we going to make any difference? I just want to pass it over to Michelle so she can continue with this. It's just, thanks very much for that clarification.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. I think what I'd like to dig into, Ms. Lafreniere, if I can, the not mandatory part, and how do you put regulations in place? I understand we're asking for a national judicial inquiry, but I think diving a little bit deeper, rather, into the Coaching Association protocol is really important. How often is recertification or training required?
So we would call that maintenance of certification, and it is required over a 4-year period.
You can go for 4 years without having any further updates.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, and sports can add on requirements in professional development. And the maintenance of certification is additional requirements. It's not a retaking of all of the content and curriculum that gave them the designation. So much like a regulated profession, they have requirements to maintain their designation within their profession, which is not going back to their university curriculum, but rather enhancing their knowledge.
Who's enforcing that they're doing that?
So we actually have a national database that if a person does not maintain adherence to that recertification, it actually shows up on their education transcript that they were certified but not renewed, is what we would call that.
But they don't have, it's not, because you had said earlier, it's not mandatory. So there would be lots of people who don't have this anyway. So if you have, if you have somebody who wants to report abuse, what's the procedure then?
Well, we are thank you, Madam Chair. We are the education body. And so while we do receive complaints, we actually don't have the authority through the education program to do anything. We try to pass people on to the responsible organization so that it is dealt with. Within the professional coaching or chartered professional coach, when an individual is it has that designation, then we ensure to try to investigate that to see if there is a complaint that we need to remove that designation.
Okay. Thank you.
But that changes with OSIC.
Oh, thank you very much. I guess I would just come back to a great comment that Mr. LeMay said of who is watching the watchers.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Back to Jenna. Jenna, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And
actually, I'm lying to you, 5 minutes.
I've wondered. Thank you very much. And I'm going to direct my questions at Mrs. Lafreniere. First of all, I want to make sure I understand your involvement or not with the Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner, OSEG, to date.
So we are required, as per the contribution agreement, to become compliant. And we've reviewed all of our policies, and we will be signing on officially as of January 20th.
And how do you view that, those requirements and the establishment of OSEG in how you move forward as an organization? How does it impact you?
Well, I think for us, Madam Chair, thank you. It actually is a good process that gives us a body that informs us if a complaint has happened, if it is a registered coach. So from our perspective, that is a really important step forward. We don't employ coaches. We educate coaches and we screen and register them. So that's where we have the ability to remove a coach from an in good standing status. But there are very few coaches who go through that process. It's primarily just our major games coaches. And so I want this OSIC to be established, whether it's not perfect as our athletes have described, but it's a step, and we need a step. We need an interim step to at least move us forward, to give us some level of independence from the national federations to hear investigations or complaints.
Okay, terrific. And so does your organization have a coaching registry currently?
We don't have a coaching. We have a chartered professional coaches, and it's a back end screening that we do for coaches who go to Olympics, Paralympics, Commonwealth, and Pan Am Games, and some national championships. And so some sports require that screening. So screening, the mandated safe sport training, a criminal record check, and 2 good references that we receive, and we provide that green light back to the Olympic Committee or to the National Sport Federation, but it is not largely used. Maybe it's 1,000 coaches. So I want to be very transparent about that.
And why isn't it widely used? Just so I understand that piece.
Because we've never had the buy-in of our partners to create a registry. A profession is typically regulated at the provincial level. So in that complexity of provincial territorial regulation, a national registry is really hard to enforce.
Okay, very Very interesting. So maybe last on this piece. So as you move forward with your agreement with OSIC, excuse me, as OSIC is established and is moving forward, if they have a complaint against a coach, what would you then do with that? What is the outcome? Or what does that look like?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would, if we're informed, if we receive the final decision and the appeals process has been exhausted, because that is due diligence, if they were in our chartered professional coach or registered coach, we would remove them from in good standing.
Okay.
What I'm going to do, because my clerk is letting me know, Karen, you got to end this very soon. We've got 3 minutes left. Adrian, 1 minute. Leah, 1 minute, and then we'll be done. Leah, Gagali. Go ahead, Adrian.
Wow. François, dans ce cas-là...
François, I'll just move straight to my second question then. The federal government is currently reviewing its sports policy, and we know that the federal government could do more. As a local entity, were you consulted for the minister's policy that should be tabled in February? Answer, no, I haven't heard of any local association being consulted. And if we want to succeed in Canada, because I think we have the means to do so, we need to work together at all levels. Maybe not table it in February, but take the time to sit down with the provinces and territories and see what can be done together. Thank you again, François, and thank you for highlighting the handball team, because they have come to me to say that there is not enough funding. I think that if we want true culture change, we need to give women and girls their place, and we need to work on that matter of inequality in Canada.
Last minute of questions. You've got the floor.
Thank you so much. My last question is for Madame Lafreniere. So I find that disturbing. So you provide coaches with training. Sounds like most of it's online. If coaches are found in violation, then they be taken off the good list. But we've heard so much testimony that's indicated very clearly this is not happening. This is not happening, and coaches, as we heard in the testimony before yours, continue to be able to coach in spite of significant allegations of abuse. So because I don't have time, unfortunately, I want to ask you a yes or no question. Do you think the current system, the way it is protecting kids from coaches that abuse children, yes or no?
No.
Thank you.
I must say, I don't think we could have ended anything more powerfully on that. Wow. On behalf of the committee, I would really like to thank Francois Lemay and Ms. Lafreniere. I'm sorry, I can't say that properly today. Thank you so much for bringing the truth and your testimony here today. I really, really appreciate it. Just a reminder to all of the committee members, we'll be meeting at 11 o'clock on Monday morning. Do I see Ron? Do you want to adjourn today? Ron's adjourning today. We're adjourned. Thanks, Ron.